Welcome to the Global Health Diplomats, brought to you by a Shot in the Arm podcast. I'm Ben Plumley, and I'm joined as ever by my co-host and partner in crime, Professor Ambassador Eric Goosby. Eric, how are you doing?
Very good, Ben. Always good to see you in these troubled times.
Always good to see you too.
Yeah.
It seems, although we are normally doing this podcast to reflect on trends that are going on in the world, this is becoming sort of increasingly newsy as every day there is some new major development that's happening in the world of global health. And so I was thinking that for this episode, we might cover a few topics. First up, the funding to international development that is and isn't happening from the US government. And as we are recording on Thursday, the 27th of March, that memo that USAID, or the State Department, I should say, sent to Congress listing all the funds that are in and funds that have been terminated. And we could sort of reflect on what that means. Also wanted to talk a bit about things that are going on in health and human services. Obviously, you're at UCSF, the University of California at San Francisco, right in the forefront of that because of the funding cuts to the National Institutes of Health, to the Center for Disease Control, CDC, and just what all that is meaning. And we've got an announcement today of some, I think, 10,000 staff cuts within the department. And then I thought we might actually turn our attention to measles, which I think is becoming an even bigger issue. Does that sound good?
Sounds good, Ben.
To get our chops into?
Yeah.
Well, first up, then, what's going on with the US's international development strategies, if strategies there are some? And obviously the latest news is that the continuing resolution for keeping the government open in the United States has been approved by Congress, signed by the president. So nothing changes in theory until the end of the financial year, which of course in the United States is September. But in that, there have already, as we know, been major announcements of cuts. And I just wondered, first up at the 38,000 foot level, whether the continuing resolution, in your mind, gives us a little bit more leeway to protect things that are important, or do we have to accept this as a blank check for the administration to make the significant cuts it needs to make in order to fund its tax cut promise?
Yeah, well, I think that's a nice way to frame it, to talk about it. The continuing resolution, as you're implying, really gave us an opportunity to interpret that as a continuation of 2025 funding moving forward to the end of this fiscal year, which, fiscal year changes in October. The fact that they passed a continuing resolution is language that gives us an opportunity to say whatever was funded last year was the priority decision to fund the following things last year. That prioritization stays through this year up until September. If they allow that to happen, legally they should. So the law is that. That continuing resolution reflects what the Congress passed legislatively as what we are willing to fund. That is law, and we are obligated to either tell them how we did fund that to completion, or we revised the budget and changed it. They're saying, now here's the subtlety, the government, the Trump administration is saying in the House resolution that passed the continuing resolution, they changed 4 or 5 things, which means it's not the same budget as last year, and gives them an argument to say, we changed the budget and you voted and approved it. That was the Schumer anger that everyone had. is they slipped those four things in, which kicked us off the tee to be able to argue that that's still the budget we're legally responsible to. And so they're going to have to debate that. It'll be lawyers on both sides of that issue in the Trump administration arguing their side, and our OGC, Office of General Counsel, in the State Department and in HHS will get together and decide what they think the law says. I think it says what I said. I don't think they'll change that. And they'll say, if you're going to now say this isn't the law, you're going to have to go through that revision to us too. So I think we've got them in a good position where they'll have to continue it through the year, through the end of this fiscal year, which gives us the numbers that we had before to continue. And that's what people are hoping will, to give us a breathing, some space in the transition to really make a conscious, intellectual decision on what are our priorities, what should or should not continue. The claim that the Trump team has made continuously that these are not aligned with President Trump's priorities pales as you move into this discussion. So I think they're kind of stuck. They can't have it both ways. Well, we'll see.
Gosh, I mean, it could potentially then mean that all the terminations, the gnashing of clothes and wrenching of teeth that we have suffered over the last 2 or so months, that all of that actually is postponed until October. Mm-hmm. So taking UNAIDS as an example, they received a termination notice that their funding for 2025 and beyond was terminated. There is thus the potential for the joint program then to continue to receive funding that Congress appropriated in 2025, and that any changes then take place in the next fiscal year.
That's the way to think about it.
Wow. And what about... No, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying that is the argument that now needs to be resiliently re-articulated and held. And I think the momentum and kind of energy is on the side of holding it. But, the transition that should have occurred, that could have occurred in a decision to make this over a 7 to 9 month period of transition was missed because of the abruptness of the implementation. They went right to implementation. I think ill-advised, and I think dangerous and irresponsible to do that. You put things in jeopardy that never would have had to have come into any period of vulnerability. We could have sidestepped all of it, and it's still going to be difficult to find resources to replace the commitment made in the original program decision, but that will give us months to have that discussion as opposed to weeks. Absurd, mean kind of decision. It resulted in a dominoing of things that were unnecessary and having to just go through them, but had an edge of making and adding consternation to the moment that was really unnecessary and immature. I mean, really disappointing. And to have that happen in our arena, in a public health orchestrated series of programs, is even just more tragic.
Well, let's look at it then from one of the really big funding terminations that was announced, or not announced, but was included in that memorandum that the State Department provided Congress, I think, as part of the review of what happens for the rest of 2025. And that is the termination of funding to Gavi. And it's an organization, a movement that both you and I have been very closely involved in over the years. And it has led global vaccination efforts, particularly childhood vaccinations. And I just do not understand why that would be terminated. But to apply what we've just said to that, the news coverage is suggesting that the termination for Gavi is fairly immediate and that there is no time for preparation by the Gavi Secretariat to prepare for this big change. Is it your understanding that Gavi's funding would be terminated moving forward in 2026, or is this another of those battlefields that have to be fought right now?
Ben, I think it's not clear to me what the best approach would be for the Gavi decision. Gavi was surprised that it came so abruptly to them. They're acting as if they think it's an immediate decision. They need, just like in the discussion just before with the continuing resolution, they need to have that same argument in their discussion with the U.S. government on this. The shared responsibility that the Gavi effort reflected for the global public health community is unprecedented in its ability to concentrate resources and have them go to low-income countries and have the impact that was intended. Gavi is an example of where a big program that sits above countries actually funneled to the least in those countries able to do it themselves. And if that isn't the whole idea, I don't know what is. The greater good was shared and contributed to in a unique way in Gavi that I, again, grieve that was so easily removed in such a decision with no process, and that once again that got legs, and we retrospectively try to pull it back to a discussion. We've got to figure out how we get these decisions in front of us as opposed to presented to us as a fait accompli. And of course, that's the way it is. And people in the profession of medicine, public health, working with communities really go for a consensus is their first instinct. But this isn't what this group really understands, nor know how to respond to someone who's trying to come at them with a consensus discussion. They want to go to an abrupt decision where a proclamation is made and an implementation decision is launched. The discussion does not seem to be part of what this administration wants to put on the table. And it adds to the anxiety, chaos, and morbidity of what these decisions are potentially going to make goes way up to do harm, to cause suffering, and to kill people. That's the continuum we're on with these programs. And there's just no other way to say it. And I think our colleagues in the Trump administration have a distorted view of where that responsibility begins and ends. They've had years of holding that responsibility, and you can't just decide in an instant that you no longer are responsible for that. A process is critical and humane to do.
So, Eric, you say that, and then listening to you, on the one hand, you've expressed, I think, some degree of optimism, but just right now, you're expressing that anger, that passion and frustration that has been long bubbling up inside you. And so I want to challenge you, play devil's advocate.
Okay.
You could be presenting the career civil servant's argument. This is the law. This is how it plays out. So any of these changes have to take place within the context of the law. The continuing resolution, apart from these four areas, continues funding at the same levels until the end of the financial year. So investments committed to continue.
Or a budget revision is needed. You need to tell the legislative body that you aren't going to do what they told you to do as reflected in the law, and you're going to do something else. You can revise it, but that's a process that takes weeks too and is iterative, but that isn't happening.
It's not happening. And to boot, the big tax cuts that the administration has promised, and in which the two houses of Congress have committed to.
I know.
Those are not going to wait till 2026. Those are going to happen moving forward now, aren't they? And the question would be, why on earth would the Trump administration make these such major announcements about cutting this, cutting that in global health, in domestic health, when their eye is on tax cuts and their eye is on rejigging the economy through the announcements of tariffs so that the whole nature of the United States relationship with the world is fundamentally altered. In other words, I'm suggesting to you that is it not wishful thinking that we have this opportunity to postpone these cuts until the start of fiscal year 2026?
It's wishful thinking, but as long as we are still a country that is ruled by law, this is what the law says should happen. We are foolish to let that slip off the discussion table. And it is our shame that allows that to happen. They're good at it. They're good at presenting a dilemma that puts us further down the road of discussion than that is reflected in the reality that has occurred. This is an example of that. They're good at it. It's worked repeatedly. And if we are stupid enough in this instant not to see that they're trying to gaslight it again, shame on us. But I'm telling you, this is the opportunity to draw the line, get the troops aware of the deceptions, and start a drumbeat of resistance in academic medical centers, especially. The movement rapidly to concede to demands made by the Trump administration in our academic community will be a fatal flaw, is my prediction. That was not something that should have been given. It should have been fought over, and the platform on which the sides were defined. The inability to bring that to the Senate in the discussion around the budget that the House passed was the tragedy of it, is that it eliminated the platform in which that juxtaposition of their position versus what could have been delineated for the population to understand what's at stake. Right now, they've tried to jump over that explanation, so we're in the end game before we've even set up the players in what the confrontation is. They're smart. They are smarter than we are in this manipulation and ability to manipulate how humans behave with each other. We're naive in it. They're very sophisticated in it, so much so that we often don't even recognize when we're being manipulated.
Yeah.
But I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of the fact that my sensibilities are not so distorted that I go there immediately, and that the humanity that we've got in how we deal with each other, that's the humanity part. Now, if you want to get rid of that, that's tragic on a different level. But we're in a work and in a profession, and what we do with our day, we do things with our day that do things to people that sustain and expand their ability to live a healthier life or a longer life. And that promise we made to individuals and countries in the Global Health Foreign Service, Gavi orchestration of resources that brought from high income to low income recipients, that gradient took 20 years to create, and to dismantle it with such a disregard for the impact it has had and continues to have, and to dismiss that as not being part of our future is just tragic to me. That dialogue has to happen somewhere. Academic medical centers have missed the opportunity to play that role, and they need to grab it back.
Wow. Again, so much to unpack in that. You say they're smart, and one of the things I wanted to get your thoughts on is strategy. And in our previous conversations, in our previous episodes, you've been suggesting that give them a chance, let's hear what they've got to say, let them come to the table with us, and then let's make their priorities work. And that's been a very honorable thing to do. And by saying that, I guess I say honorable in perhaps not the most politest way possible. But here's the thing, right? If you look at the funding cuts that are listed in that memo, and for my sins, I spent a few hours yesterday plowing through those 281 pages, and some of it was really surprising. I mean, one of the big good news items is, of course, that the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, that funding has not been cut whenever the cuts take place. Also, an organization that you and I both know very well, LVCT Health in Nairobi, Kenya, that provides incredible HIV services to everyone and anyone who needs them.
Who comes in
that funding is still in place.
Yeah.
And there is, and I'm not going to identify them, and I'm not going to do anything that might perhaps highlight it. There are organizations that focus on supporting communities most affected by HIV and who are very often excluded from health services. There are programs that are continued to be funded. But you look at the cuts.
So are high-risk population programs are still being funded in there? I haven't had the opportunity to look at it in that detail.
And again, I'm not. Probably wise for us not to go into too much detail in case we highlight things that they may have missed. But yes.
But trippy. Wow.
Trippy. Yeah.
I'm surprised too.
But it makes me think. Oh, and of course, just one more thing, that while a lot of UN funding has been cut, smashed. We talked about UNAIDS, some WHO funding, of course, UNICEF as well. But funding for the World Food Programme is pretty much still secured.
But Ben, you saw a drop in UNICEF funding?
Now, is it a drop? I don't know, but there are significant cuts. There are some areas where UNICEF's funding is continuing. And maybe there is a logic to it, but I couldn't see it from the description of the grants that are being cut and which are being saved. So I wonder whether this is perhaps also a bit of a Doge-like slash and burn. And the strategy, if it exists at all, is about pulling things down rather than creating a new world order. And in that context, again, I wonder whether no, that's not right. I wonder whether the reliance on the rule of law and the established procedures and protocols and precedents, I really wonder if that's going to save us. And then that brings me to your point about the Senate and Chuck Schumer. And I'm wowed by your passion about that. I got to say, I'm finding it very hard to see the strategy in Senator Schumer's behavior in getting enough Democrat senators to approve the continuing resolution, precisely because it opened up the argument that the Trump administration and the House Republicans and the Senate Republican majority can indeed effect sweeping changes to the budget between now and the end of September. It's almost as if there isn't thought for the long term. It's just about delivering the slash and burn now.
No, I think it is. And I think it is such a different cadence and pattern of argument and discourse around a budget preparation that people who are used to doing budgets really didn't recognize this as the discussion to align with an inner. I would have to say that the Trump team played that as if they were doing something that you believe, you saw with Musk in Twitter coming in and cutting 70% of the workforce and then working over the next weeks after the initial let go of employees to trickle back in the people that they really felt were needed. And I think in the private sector, this may be a strategy where they flush and then repopulate because it's efficient and it clearly identifies the holes. The people that are important to your operation are immediately evident. When you don't have anybody, you see it all stop, and it allows the kind of executive influence in that thinking to cherry pick the replacement back up at a much lower work number than was there originally. So it's a rapid way to change your workforce. It's a cruel way to change your workforce. But when the workforce is creating programs that sustain or expand or save lives, it's irresponsible to do it that way. And there's no other discussion that needs to happen. So stop it. And if we let them do it, we have a complicity and allowing that to be the reality. If nothing else, you go down shouting that this is unacceptable at a minimum. But ideally, you bring them back into a dialogue that allows them to identify their priorities so you can react to them, not to accept them, Ben, because that wasn't the intent. It was just to understand where they're coming from, because we haven't had that courtesy yet. They haven't even told us what they want to do, other than, 70,000 foot, 80,000 foot, headline notices of isolation and downsizing and blood, and we don't want foreign anything type summations. That's not planning. That's not strategically thinking about how the country that was the elephant in the room for public health response and for understanding the science of any infectious disease or any non-communicable disease that you could name. The motors that were generated and built in the United States are the motors that answered those questions and have advanced us in almost every field. I'm proud of that. And HIV is all over that. TB is all over that in terms of the connection to USG research and outcomes that resulted in changing either how we diagnose it or treat it, let alone the whole understanding the population, high risk versus low risk, how the virus moves through an individual and the natural history understanding, but more importantly, how it moves through a population. The United States has contributed with our European colleagues to that understanding, to appreciating there are variable risks in the population depending on behavior. We're smart enough to figure that out and try to block it. But if we don't do it, the virus moves unengaged, unchecked through that population, and more people get infected and die.
Well, let us hope that RFK, that Secretary Rubio, and a few others accidentally invite you and me onto a Signal chat where we get the inside scoop on what the strategy is.
Maybe we'll be mistakenly put on.
Yeah,
but I was going to say it is really remarkable to not. We have to, as a profession, not allow a non-dialogue, a non-process around prioritizing whatever the Trump priorities are. It is not to allow them to move unchecked. It's so we can understand them, so we can check them. Because each one of them has public health implications that they may not be thinking through in a modeling kind of way. And that's what we've developed an expertise at, and don't have to be surprised.
Yeah. And that may be precisely the thing they don't want us to do. So there is no discussion because they don't want us to be able to push back and offer answers. I mean, this could really be a very reductionist, recidivist place to be, that, we're back to the 1920s and America on its own with this sort of isolationism, the back to normalcy as they described it then. But there is a little bit of good news. What's happening with TB, the US's commitment to TB?
Yeah. So much to everyone's celebration, USAID has been able to keep a discussion together in the USAID that has seen the importance of continuing the Stop for TB program that USAID, in their innovative thinking, really launched as a multi-year effort to develop new diagnostics, new therapeutics, and new standards of care that are incorporated into guidelines throughout the world for the new treatment modalities for multi-drug resistant TB, drug-sensitive TB as well. And USAID has created a clinical trial infrastructure that was in mid-sentence that is going to be allowed to continue, is what it appears to be the case. So we're thrilled. We're still hesitant to speak too much to it because the specifics are trickling out starting yesterday. I think through the course of this week, we'll learn a lot more. But a sigh of like, oh my gosh, they're not closing this down has been deeply appreciated. And Hopkins, UCSF in particular, who are kind of the two mainstays in the co-PI role. but a biggie
Yeah.
for global.
And something positive in the context of the massive reductions in investment to academic institutions that you referred to earlier. That apart, those cuts seem to be continuing apace, right? There's no second guessing or reversal of those happening.
No reversal, but again, I want to point out that there's no platform of dialogue. There's no place where it's being discussed. There's not a negotiation going on. So they have successfully figured out a way to move decision-making forward in with only half of the principal in participants involved in informing that movement at all. And so it's a foreign discussion to those of us who've been in this work for 20 years. And it took a while for people to realize this is different. The old format is not available. It's not going to come at you later. So engage with this one. And I think the academic institutions in the world that are NIH dependent are realizing that this is shifting one way or the other. Almost regardless of the Trump administration, things seem to be moving that we're going to be dealing with after Trump has moved on to whatever's next for him. These are, and we need to think of the changes that are being talked about and laid in place as an opportunity to inform how it goes forward from this point on.
But Eric, let me interrupt and just put this to you again. Isn't that the strategy, not to engage us?
Yeah.
The worldview that the second Trump administration is embracing is one where the public health community, the scientific community, let Trump down over COVID. And not only let Trump down, but let down the American dream, the American individualism, the rights of an American to do what the hell they want, regardless of the consequences to anybody else. And I think that is at the heart of the strategy, and that it has, future be damned. If there are Ebola outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the borders with Uganda, so what? That's their problem. The way we protect America is to stop that from coming in. It's all about Fortress America.
Yeah, the inconsistency in their thinking is that that's what we built before, and that's what they're dismantling. We had it so we engaged the threat not on the American shores, but where it broke out, and effectively walled it off with not an ineffective response, but the correct response at the site of the outbreak. So we expanded capability in the countries where these diseases present themselves, so they don't get on boats and airplanes and come to the United States, is the secondary benefit of that. But the primary response is the humane response needed for an unmet need at the Ebola outbreak, at the outbreak of the disease. And for a country that has the ability not to help in that response, it has been unethical in the world we've been in. And now, if they're going to make this irresponsible for a country to give aid and be an ally and be helpful because your knowledge base is different or your resources are different, is ethically corrupt to not allow that to continue to happen and to expand the ability to do it more and better. It is a way for us to stay protected in the way that the Trump administration would like to. It's just a secondary benefit, in my thinking, to what is a primary human response to an unmet need as the initiating event. But
yeah,
abandon that is
I hear you, Eric. So, Eric, another issue, timely, that I'd really like to get your thoughts on is the announcement live this morning that the Department of Health and Human Services is cutting another 10,000 jobs from the department. I mean, it's a huge department. It covers the CDC, it covers the NIH, as we've discussed. And I want to say this makes me very angry, but I do think there is a strategy here. I think the strategy, as I've mentioned, is to break everything and burn everything down. And from that, create something that is not top heavy in bureaucracy, that gives freedom to those with the money and the authority to be able to exercise the freedom of choice that they want. And I think that the real issues about why health and human services were created, to promote health, to promote human services, to promote well-being in the United States, I think those are secondary. And I just wondered what your take was on what's happening with health and human services.
I think that the move with Robert Kennedy's role as Secretary of Health created a discussion that was extraordinary to watch how it evolved into kind of areas of past interest with Mr. Kennedy, but not, and kind of has bounced around with things that he has done in his past in a way that I've never seen a Secretary of Health's portfolio or past work move into discussion. It's been very strange to watch. The concerns around his beliefs around vaccines and the role they play are worrisome. We've already seen any kind of hesitation at a senior leader's position coming out of a senior leader's mouth ripples in a population negatively, for sure. It can also ripple positively, but when you bring in questioning efficacy discussions around something that is life-threatening, you've really got to ask yourself the risk-benefit you've introduced being still positive on the benefit to the person that you're saying or making a recommendation on needs or doesn't need a vaccination. The confusion it's created has been extraordinary for something that is clearly two measles vaccines there's no change in recommendations or efficacy studies. Nothing has changed. They're still 97 or more % effective in inferring immunity to exposure. So if you remember with COVID, we had it would allow you to get infected, but it would not propagate in you and move to an ICU event and not kill you. That benefit was thought to be a variable need by many people, not good enough because it didn't prevent the infection from occurring. Measles is so infectious. It is it's hundreds to thousands of times more infective than COVID. It aerosolizes, Ben, and stays in the air for days after they've coughed in the room. So you'd have a person in your waiting room with measles, and the 5 people in the first exam room down the hall get infected. And with pregnant women, we've monitored and followed how these viruses move through a population of pregnant women. And that's where all this data came from. It's not weak data. It's very strong data. The most infectious virus we've ever seen, measles, okay, disseminates and goes to every organ in your body and can kill that organ if it goes there's no treatment for measles, so you're going to run its course. You give supportive care and hope that their immune constitution and nutrition is high enough that they'll get through it. And in most people, they do. But in a significant number, they do not. And it has all of these serious manifestations in CNS from encephalitis that can be permanent and put a person in a continuum with a motor sensory impaired kind of cerebral palsy type of life as an adult, if as a kid you get it.
Well, to your point, Eric, the perhaps one of the crushing issues here is that measles can do extraordinary damage to people with undeveloped immune systems, and that's young kids, that's early infants. And it is extraordinary to me that, do you remember during COVID, everyone was talking about the R0?
Yep.
And all things being equal, how many people would the virus be transmitted to? And I think we said for COVID, it was between 2 and 5, I think 2.5 maybe.
Yeah.
Well, for measles, it's up to 15.
Yeah. It went from 1.7 to 2.5.
Yeah.
At different times in the outbreak, it varied with it. No, this is like nothing that's out there. It always has been that way. This isn't new. This is a bad actor.
A bad actor.
And that's why getting a vaccine for this has changed the way physicians see the disease. Young physicians have never seen it. Have almost never seen it. It's physicians who are in their late 70s and 80s who actually took care of it. But most of the people are dead who saw measles at that level. But that's why it is the first thing that you get. The MMWR is one of the first vaccines we developed, made, and have continued. So there's no question that, there is a vaccine that works for measles, and there's no argument to me for you not to get it.
Well, where it takes us, and this, I guess, is the final territory for us to cover in this episode, it speaks to perhaps another element of this Trump administration strategy, the idea that an individual's right to make decisions about their own health supersedes, in every setting, the community benefit that comes from a public health response, where coerced is probably too strong a word, but where the social compact is such that everyone agrees to do something in order to protect not just themselves, but their communities. And what we have seen from Robert Kennedy Jr. speaking about the vaccine for measles, I mean, he hasn't disputed it, and he says, sure, yeah, take it if you want. Have your children vaccinated if you want. But it is that sense that the individual making a decision based on the information that they choose to find, rather than there being an independent sense of what is accurate. It is that is driving health policy and international policy in the United States.
I think you're right, Ben. I think it's very insightful to see that connection, that the basic tension between individual freedom and choice juxtaposed against a life-threatening threat that could threaten your life or cause a lot of morbidity in your life, that you are in a dialogue in our public discourse where they're saying my individual rights are at least just as important or more important than the needs of the larger population. I believe that is just not true, and that your civilization will kill itself earlier if it sticks to that thinking. But I will say that the idea of I think you're right. I think it is an individual right. You hit me with something I really hadn't really played out in thinking, but it really resonates as I think about it more. That kind of is the nut of the angst. It does butt up against that right to do what we want, and you're restraining me from doing that, and therefore you're bad, and we're gonna force you to do what we want. Is the part that I leave them. Why are they winning that argument? Why is it that case? I mean, I don't believe you can tie people down and vaccinate them, so we're not going to go there. But I believe to allow ignorance and lack of understanding to dominate in a bad decision is our fault too. So to find a way to talk to the community that has the inappropriate thought on how this is working and playing out for defining their risk is the part that we need to re-educate on. Once you give it to people, people understand and see it. But relative risk is a concept we have not put in our educational system. Probability is not an idea that people carry around and use. And that's all tied up in why it's a risk to you or it isn't. So to try to explain that and expect people to just divine it has been maybe our fault a little in there.
So in a way, Eric, you're telling us not to be Chuck Schumers in public health and global health.
Ben, I want to say I couldn't have more respect for Senator Schumer. I just want to say that this man has been a lifetime of contribution. But with this one, and I phoned his office to talk to his staff about my real deep concern over how this decision wasn't a good one. for the reasons I said, but only applaud his lifetime contributions and would never talk negatively about him for that reason. But in this instance, we should have argued this out. It was the platform we needed at the time we needed it, and we didn't get it.
And I was making a slightly facetious comment, and I apologize for that. I think my point, though, is what we've learned through a lifetime of service and achievement, that was relevant then, but is it relevant now? And I think you are pointing to something that I feel very strongly, that we have to take advantage of this moment of slash and burn to recreate public health, community engagement, public health education, and public health articulation about why the things that we are so passionate about matter and why they matter for individuals. And again, I'm just sort of thinking of a comment Richard Holbrooke, the late Richard Holbrooke, said to me way back when, you have to demonstrate when it comes to HIV in his case, that what happens to a miner in South Africa is as important as what happens to a steel worker in Ohio. And the steel worker's health is directly impacted by the health of the miner.
You and he saw that really at a very early time before the rest of the planet was there. And it is amazing when you think about the clarity in your challenge at the time to why this was something people needed to stop what they're doing and, including the business community, focus on this moment. We have a future in front of us that could be low morbidity, high longevity, a life and a ability to interact with your environment that maximizes your ability to pursue and achieve all of the opportunities that will achieve kind of your highest level of function as an individual, contributing to your family, your community, and your society. All of that good stuff is still in front of us if we choose to go for it, and not a doom and gloom, it's all death and destruction future. It's not necessarily so. We have an opportunity to choose a future where there's enough resources to go around to put a basement of health and education for everybody there. And I'm talking about the planet, not just countries. And I hope the Trump administration sees that that is in their interest and the interest of the American people to achieve that and get there. So I'm not giving that up.
Eric, what a brilliant way to bring this episode to a close. We've covered a whole lot of things that we will come back to in future episodes in more detail. But thank you so much for sharing your passion and anger this morning and letting me vent. So with that, I'll let you get on with the rest of the day and continue to fight the good fight.
Okay, Ben. Thanks very much. It's always great to talk to you.
Okay, well, that's it for this episode. Thanks to Eric Goosby. Thanks also to Eric Espera, our director and producer from NewsDoc Media. Remember, you can find us on all of your favorite podcast platforms, but check us out on our YouTube channel, where not only can you hear our dulcet tones, but you can see our dulcet faces as well. With that, have a great week and a safe week, everyone.